My very special guest today on The Village Voice is Miroslav. Now I'm seeing a different name there than Bardovic.
I haven't updated my Zoom name. That's why. Should we start again? You can keep going if you want.
I'd just like to do that. Let's keep going. I'll make sure that I put your name in there in any case, Miroslav. And as Shakespeare once said, "What's in a name? A rose by any other name would smell as sweet."
Hmm.
You've got quite a background story, Miroslav, that I guess is not a story that would be common for those born in this nation. You're born in Yugoslavia, and that was not a particularly easy place to be in your early childhood.
Yeah, that's spot on, Peter. I'm sure it was a great place a few years before my childhood, but yeah, I was born and the war started when I was like 4 or 5 years old. So I came to Australia as a refugee at the age of 5. And we were actually refugees twice. So first I was born in Bosnia, so from Bosnia into Serbia, and then from Serbia to Australia.
Not a kind of, at that age, I guess you would have essentially perceived that as those workings that your parents had to do, but you would not have seen much of what was going on. It would just have been like a traumatic experience, mostly run through the adults that would have been moving you about as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I don't think I had any comprehension around what was happening. I can't I can't even imagine that. Like, I do have some small memories, like waking up and my mother was crying and was inconsolable and I couldn't work out why. And her telling me dad's been called into active duty or whatever, but like, as a 5-year-old, what does that mean? Then I remember being in Serbia and having these experiences of like being upset that I couldn't have chocolate. Now, being the war, everything was rationed, money was tight. It's like, chocolate was a once in a week kind of thing. And me as a 5-year-old didn't understand that. I was like, why do we have money for everything else but not for chocolate?
Yeah, sometimes it would be fabulous to be able to go back to 5 and have a complete lack of understanding of some of the horrible things that do happen and continue to happen in this world that we're in. But let's not concentrate on that. Let's look at the fact that you have come to a nation where the language was entirely different, where you also had some difficulty in using language. That is, I understand that you had a significant stutter and had quite a great deal of difficulty in connecting in that way.
Yeah, I did. So when I was young, I used to stutter. I mean, even today I stuttered. I say mostly in English. I don't stutter anymore. Like, it feels like I've worked through my personality and found who I am and largely reclaimed my voice. But in my mother tongue, Serbian, when I speak, I still stutter quite frequently. And I found like the more regulated my nervous system is, the less it happens. So if I'm communicating in a settled place about things that are internally at home for me,
Yeah.
If I'm speaking about meditation and things I love, I'm like, oh, there's a lot less stuttering that happens. But the last couple of years, I've really made an effort of going back to the Balkans, marinating inside the culture. And the first time I was boarding from Lisbon to go to Belgrade, the capital of Serbia, and I was standing in the queue and the people next to me were speaking Serbian and my whole body like just shut off. I was like, I can't even do basic communication right now. So it's definitely something that happened in those formative years that's lodged in the language, which has been easier to unplug in English, but there's obviously still, like the program is still running underneath the surface when I'm speaking Serbian.
There's something there, of course, as well about the direction that you've taken in your life. If we look at that 5-year-old moving through to where you are now, the principal concept that you've worked with is to encourage people to be able to do essentially what we're doing now, or do a spoken word in front of large groups of people, being able to public speak. There must be some connection there.
Yeah, without a doubt there is. It was like, so if I was to take it down or inwards a few levels, I think our desires drive our life, and the deeper the desire, the significantly different our life is going to look. And for me, at some point, probably many lifetimes ago, but definitely in this one as well, the desire for awakening arose. And when, nothing really made sense to me in life, I was kind of going along with it through those, when you're more self-aware and you're going through high school and all of those things, I was kind of like, I'm not really buying into the story I've been sold. Like, I don't have the same interests. And it wasn't until I read firstly The Alchemist where that really touched something inside me. It was like, oh, this guy has put into words something I haven't been able to. It's like he put my own feelings about the world into words. And then when I started reading books on awakening, enlightenment, etc., I'm like, oh, this really speaks to me. This is kind of what I'm here for. This is what I'm pulled towards. And when people ask me how I got into public speaking, I'm like, I didn't. I got fascinated with the path of going inwards. And when I started meditating and recognizing, one, I was probably socially anxious my whole life, and meditation was giving me something different. I never would have used those words back then, but that was probably the experience. I started asking the question, how can I be in this experience more often? And what came back really quickly was you have to start teaching and speaking. And I think why is because that's what I had to do to face those parts of me that had its voice shut off, that were terrified of human interaction. That path of teaching, firstly teaching myself, but then teaching others to speak and teach and facilitate, was like looking down the barrel of my own fear.
And in doing that, you've now come to a place where it's your principal work, and you've obviously had to travel a journey in order to bring yourself there. Let's look a little bit at that journey. When you arrived in Australia, what happened from there? Where first of all, where did you grow up in Australia?
We settled in my uncle's house. This was in Enderver Hills, and there was 3 families living in probably a 3-bedroom house. There was one family per bedroom. Every day it was like, you go to the shopping, you go to the market, because that many people eat for a lot of food. I don't know what there was, 8, 12, somewhere between 12 and 15 of us. After that, we ended up settling in Dandenong, as I don't know if the listeners are familiar, but Dandenong's known for being, at least when I grew up, it was the most multicultural suburb in Australia. So there was just as many foreigners as there was Australians living in Dandenong. I mean, those were kind of the early days. I could relate stuff to those days to how it's influenced me now, but I just feel sometimes that gets we're kind of throwing darts at the wall. There's definitely formative experiences. The one I mentioned. Were you
well received? I mean, the Australians don't have a particularly good name for receiving those from other nations and saying, yes, you're fabulous people. They have a potential, I guess, to go down a path where they will separate themselves from you, or separate you from them. Did that happen?
Look, in the very early years, I don't have any experiences of that. The bullying incidences I can think of were not with Australians; they were with other ethnic minorities. But I know, I remember, for some of the relatives, it was harder. I know one of my aunties wouldn't say where she was from because of the cultural narrative that was there around, Yugoslavia and everything else.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I think for kids and being my age, it didn't really matter.
Right. So a fairly magnificent change, I guess, for you, in that you came to a place where you were accepted, where you then went to school, I imagine. And how did you do there? How was school? Were you a student or?
The most common thing I got on my report cards was, Miroslav is great, but how do we get him to speak? And internally, I had this relationship. I'm like, if someone else can contribute to the discussion or has the answer, it's like my voice isn't even needed. So it was very, very reclusive. Around my own kind of friends and family, I was fine. I was probably normal. But communicating outside of that, when it was a bigger group or people I wasn't friends with, I was pretty much just quiet. A lot of the time, people assumed I was mute. They would ask, one of the common things I had was people would come up to me and my friends and ask my friends, does he ever smile, pointing at me? So they would just assume I don't even speak. And, that kind of openness and probably wasn't as readily available to me in life, and still it feels like it's been something to work through.
When you look now at where you stand, you've recently stated that the two clients that you'd like to have in the Speaking Institute is Barack Obama and Anthony Robbins. That'd be a pretty solid pickup.
Yeah, it would. And I think I thoroughly enjoy that, and I think they probably would thoroughly enjoy that as well. And when I was asked that question, it was like, okay, there's something here. It's like, if I'm going to be the best at what I do, I want to work with the best. Yeah, so if I could work with speakers on that level, it means I've done my job properly, to be able to support people that have been doing this for a lifetime, and people that are considered at the top of their game. And yeah. I truly believe there's a whole another wave of communication that's coming beyond what's been done in the past.
When you say that, I'm quite interested. I've been a public speaker all my life, and one of the things that I'm noting in looking at the work that you're doing is that it seems that you're wanting to take it, or you are taking it well beyond purely language. And there are obviously things to learn there, but beyond that, I guess you've gone down the path of things like NLP and body language and the way in which we move and interact with one another. All of that plays a more significant role than simply the language we use, yes?
Partially. So all of the things you just mentioned, for me, are a mechanical approach, which do have merit. And that's, in a sense, that's nothing new. I mean, it's new depending on, if you've never heard of NLP and you come across NLP, it's like, it's new. But the mechanical approach isn't new. The mechanical approach is, you need to have inflections in your voice when you speak. And if you speak more from your belly, you're going to communicate more confidence. Like, all of these things we've known for a while in public speaking.
Yes.
And yes, there is new studies are done, new things come around. NLP isn't really new anymore, but it's part of the toolkit, and it has been from before I started. So I can't really call any of that new. I feel my fascination and invitation when I work with people is coming more from an authentic place. And authenticity, like, I recently just presented on this in Singapore, and someone came up to me afterwards and they said, everyone bangs on about authenticity, but you're the first person that's shown me frameworks for how I can be more authentic.
Right.
And so I want to say a few things here. It's like, I don't think we need to compare authenticity between people. I feel we only need to compare authenticity within ourselves.
With one's last performance compared to our current performance. Yes.
Exactly. And my invitation in there is that when we start attuning to the energetics happening between people, we come into an organic approach. So instead of modulating the voice from a mechanic, like it's a lever, like, what happens if you let yourself feel the emotion and come from a more authentic place when that's being communicated? Because then what it actually creates is trust and genuine connection with the audience.
So you're talking about essentially linking into one's feelings, one's emotional place, rather than operating entirely from the mind.
Yeah, and I think the audience, so this is the other thing, like, people say to me, but trust has been around for ages. I'm like, it has. And emotional intelligence has been on the rise over the last couple of decades. And as a byproduct of the emotional intelligence conversation is, like, we have to start communicating in a way that's more emotionally intelligent.
Yeah. When I asked you to be involved with this podcast, the understanding I hope you have is that essentially what we're working with is community and how we build community. And it involves a lot of the same things you're talking about. And I understand that through you and your new, what is it, better half or equal half, something like that. You have quite a strong sense of drawing community together. You're doing things that I'm not sure we can say it, but we probably can. Let's do it. Fuck up nights. And Victoria's been involved in, the tantric community, and a community that are really quite close with one another in something more than just the mind. How is that working out for you? Like, drawing your work in with Victoria's work, and how is community for you at this point in life?
So on the first question with Victoria, I feel these are seminal parts. So when we go beyond what we label as sexuality, and I know you've done work in this area and explored it too, but just generally for the listeners, for me, what's underneath sexuality is life force.
Indeed.
And it's got different ways of being expressed, but meeting it for our sexuality is perhaps one of the most direct ways to go there. And I'll often suggest to my speakers, it's like, yes, there's sexuality, but we can call life force or eros underneath. Like that's something you want to tap in and cultivate. And there's numerous ways, whether you do it from trainings or workshops or you do your own guided meditations, but it's like cultivating that as a force. It is the thing that's moving through you when you communicate. It is vitality itself. So it's instrumental, and our work has come together quite nicely in that way. And with community, it's a pivotal point you've asked me that in. So I grew up largely in Melbourne. So from the age of 5 to like 30-ish, I was maybe 32 or something. I was living in Melbourne. Yep. And I had a lot of community in Melbourne. Like both all of my family and our collective families that came over from the war. Like I grew up with my cousins in Melbourne. So there was quite a feeling of my own cultural identity that I grew up with. Yes. And then also the schooling and, the Australian and mixed ethnicity cultural background I had as well. So it's like I had this sense of family in both of those containers for most of my life. And then I moved up to the Gold Coast, and it's different. Like I've been here I'm just south of the Gold Coast. I'm in northern New South Wales. And I walked into the gym, and I go to the gym regularly, but a couple of months ago, I walked in and I saw an Arabic guy for the first time. And I'm like, oh my God, I feel like I'm in Dandenong. And it was this such moment of like, I'm not the only one. And like Arabs and Serbs, we're not close, that there's absolutely no link there apart from the fact that we both come from Dandenong.
Somewhere else.
Yeah, exactly. And you typically more hair or something like that. But there was just such a sense of like, of niceness in my body around that. And on one hand, like Victoria and I have created community, and it is beautiful to see the community thriving in that way. And quite often I find myself yearning for this sense of depth because it's so transient up here as well. Like Northern Rivers, I have friends that will come for a few months of the year and then leave. Yeah. There's a lot more like dropping in and dropping out. So it's like, I guess my system's trying to acclimatize to what I called recently the global village. Yep. Like the recognition that I'm not going to have the community that I've called home and the one that my parents grew up in. It's like what I'm being exposed to is a completely different sense of community.
So the thing, I guess, that's happened is that community can now generate essentially from an online place. That is, we now have literally thousands of people that in one way or another we can easily connect with. And those people can also be all over the world. That's certainly true for me. It's true for you. I wonder if we have lost something in community by it moving in that direction, though. Do we have less genuine connection with people? And how do you see that panning out in the future with the development of, obviously, your work? You're wanting to take to a worldwide stage. And yet at the same time that you do that, you're also walking down the path of artificial intelligence, you're walking down the path of technology, and there are those that are quite concerned that that's moving in a direction that is going to lose our really personable, intimate connections with one another.
Yeah, I like what you're exploring here. So I feel to offer a little story. Last year, my brother and my family and I were passing through Bosnia, and on the way through, one of my uncles from Australia was in his house in Bosnia as well. Yep. And we pulled over and we had a chat to him. He did the usual thing, very kind of domestic-minded culture, pulled out like meat and blah, 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 blah. And he's like, do you want me to show you around? And we're on this tiny little street in a tiny little village. And I'm like, sure. And he takes me up to the hill on his property. And he's like, that's the house of your cousin Drazen. That's your cousin Sasha. And he went through the whole street. And I'm like, all the cousins I grew up in Australia lived in a single street. The whole street had the same surname. And a part of me was like, wow, I cannot imagine the level of family and belonging they had when, going to hang out or speak or celebrate something was literally like just the next door over. And I remember sharing this at my wedding, and my best man is his background is South African Zulu background, and he's looked at me and he smiled and he's like, "That's what it was like for my family as well."
Yeah.
And it was kind of like it just touched something inside me, because he lives on the other side of the world and he's traveling all the time. And inside me, there was this yearning for what does it mean to be in those kind of depths of connection, when you kind of spend your whole life together. And it used to be like a sore point for me. It used to be grief. And around the wedding, it started changing. And I think what I recognized is, like, when I look at someone like him, his name's Jared. It's like when I meet Jared, because of the work we've both done, there's the capacity to come into deep meeting very, very quickly.
Yes.
That maybe if we were next door neighbors in 30 years ago, that would not have happened in that way. And I feel like the way society has expanded in terms of all these tools and techniques and like everything really.
Everything is available all the time, everywhere. You can speak with the masters, you can listen at least to the masters by the press of a button, where once you had to travel to India or whatever in order to have that experience. Do you think there's a positive outlook for humankind in the coming 50 years?
Oh God, I hope so. There is, what? Like, one thing I'm seeing is, like, yes, AI will take over a lot of the routine. One thing that I've found when I've looked at history is it's like the stories that filter down to the masses are not always necessarily what's happening, and there is bigger forces at play. And I hope the good decisions will be made, but the capacity for human connection and depth I've found has just been expanding through my lifetime. And the amount of people that have an interest in it and a desire to meet in a deeper way has just been growing at like a monumental pace,
Yeah.
When I started, I was driving 45 minutes to go to a meditation group in Melbourne. I was living in Dandenong, obviously. Whereas I'm like, now there's like yoga studios everywhere.
Right. Yeah. And the opportunity to, strangely enough, do online Zoom meditations and so on as well. So it has expanded. And one of the things I'm noticing, I just wonder what your reflection of this is, that when I was a boy, and that's back a bit now, if I needed to learn something, then I would find something at a library and look through several books until I found what I was looking for. Now, if I need to or want to know anything, from learning a language to picking up information about almost anything you can possibly imagine, I can do that in the comfort of my own home with the press of a couple of buttons. It seems to me the opportunity for humanity to be able to expand into a whole new place is present with us right now. And at the same time, that could be the edge of a cliff if we don't handle it well.
I remember speaking to someone I know that was in AI, and this was like maybe between 5 and 10 years ago. And he's like, the world has no idea what's about to happen, like how developed this technology is. Yeah.
Is there any concern in the field that you're working in, that is, teaching people how to present and speak and so on? I've done some of that in my time, and I also use my voice in a couple of different locations. And the temptation is to allow AI to take that over. So it is true that you can still have an opportunity to public speak in front of a live audience. Largely, the opportunity now also is to be able to say, okay, well, I can record 55 words, get ChatGPT to write my speech for me, and then apply the language to an avatar that I create. I never have to speak again. I can just have something else do it.
This is very real. And I think this is what I've been saying for a while. It's like, if someone's desire is to purely be a content-based speaker, those days might be numbered. Like, if people can put it into ChatGPT, I mean, you could put the script in and just have an avatar of you present this stuff if you really want to. But I feel it's going to miss a few things. And I think this brings me back to what I mentioned earlier around emotional intelligence.
Yes.
people won't even need you to do that for them. They can just do it themselves. Like, we have access to all the information we could ever imagine at our fingertips right now. And I think there's a question of two things that comes up. If we have everything, what we need is just the next bit. Like, I don't need to know how to make $100 million. I just need to know the next step in my business that's going to be useful for me, or the next step in building the community, like whatever. And I feel this is where humans do a pretty good job of meeting and communicating that. And the second thing I'll say is vitality. So what humans can bring that AI never will is vitality. It's like the living life force and presence that comes with lived experience.
Yes.
And a lot of this is embodied. Like, I can say certain things that will never land the same way if someone in a female body says it, or someone with different colored skin. And it's like that message that's lived inside of the organism is sharing not just the words, but a living transmission.
Right. Yeah. And that really draws us back to that authenticity that you were speaking of earlier. The key, if you like, to really powerful presentation is that authenticity at this stage, at least. Maybe another generation along, we'll have forgotten what that is, or we'll be able to fabricate authenticity, which is kind of tragic in a way.
Well, I don't know, from the studies I've read, I don't know if authenticity can be fabricated, but I don't know where you want to go with the conversation. Happy for you to guide it.
Yeah, well, it's for me, I always move these things in a direction that seems to make some kind of sense, and it seems to work. I want to move on to the connection that you now have with the woman that you've married, and how that influences and affects your work as you move forward. You know, no longer the single man, no longer simply making your own decisions, but having a powerful woman alongside you. What is the future for the Bardovic family?
Yeah, it's beautiful. So firstly, the night we got married, or the night after or something, I remember laying with Victoria and just saying, like, I feel different. Like, it's really strange, but it's like my back is deeper and wider, and I filled out more of my skin. It's like, if I was to put it in colloquial terms, I feel like more of a man. Yeah. But it wasn't like a logical thing of like, oh, now I'm married and I'm a man. It's like a part of me was just taking up more space in and around my body. And if I was to put words on that part, like the word responsibility was probably the loudest one.
Yeah. It's
like, both as a husband and the conversations we've had about having our own family. It's like there's a part of me that's had to expand energetically to be like, okay, I'm saying yes, and I'm opening to this chapter now.
Yeah.
And I think that, for me anyway, but I think collectively, that gives us a different resource. It gives us something more to pull on. And like, I can feel that the way that, like, the energetic structure, if I can use those words, of our relationship is holding us in a way where we can both thrive a lot more than we would as individuals.
Operating,
it's like this unconscious support that's there, as well as all the conscious, affirmations and support and everything else that comes with it. It's just like the state of being is supporting one another.
We are a team, essentially.
Yeah, very much.
Yeah. And moving forward, you're going to expand the business. That is the intention, is it? The Enlivened Speaking Institute is set to take over the world?
Yeah, pretty much, or at least the essence of it, as far as I can take it in my lifetime, and hopefully the children want to extend it into what comes after that. But no, what I'm seeing, Peter, and I say this humbly, is I feel like what I'm connecting to, I'm probably not the only one in the world. I feel like it's a gift from grace to say, like, hey, you have a message to share, go and share it. And I used to be a photographer straight out of uni. Yep. And one of the things I loved about photography is it got discovered in 3 different places in the world at the same time. It's like humanity was just ready for photography, and people started discovering it.
The 100th monkey.
Yeah, 100th monkey, exactly.
Yeah.
But yeah, when I think of it, it's like, yes, I have this to share and it's dear to me and I want to keep sharing it. But I also just feel this sense of like humanity is ready for this. We're ready to come into more authenticity, to communicate more clearly, to have a different relationship, to trust between each other.
When you look at what's happening in the world right now, there's a couple of places in the world where there's demonstration of quite the opposite of that.
Sad.
It seems that in some ways we don't learn. If you look at those things that are happening in the world, how do you maintain positivity? Do you deep dive with those occurrences? Do you step aside from them in order to stay focused on what you're doing? How does it fit in a world where there are some really awful things happening right now as we speak?
Yeah, I'm hearing you this one. Sometimes I lean in, sometimes I stay in tune, and other times I'm like, this is just too much for me. Like if I sink into this, I'm not doing the work I need to do. It's like I'm digesting problems I can't solve, which I never find overly useful. It's like
Right.
If I can't be moving the needle in some way, my time is probably better spent elsewhere. But I also just want to add, I feel like the bigger pain point for me is maybe the way narratives are twisted in some of these really sad issues. I think there was a comment, I don't know which president, but one of them made a comment about one of these situations where he said, I hope, or if only we can find a way to communicate this so it doesn't look like genocide. I'm like, that is a problem. It's like, it's kind of the opposite of my invitation. It's like, let's come into more authenticity. It's like, let's get our way so we can keep getting our way and deceiving people. It's like, there's pain like that.
Yeah, how can we deceive rather than how can we actually genuinely connect with one another? How can we genuinely own what is occurring rather than saying, okay, well, how can we spin this so that it's received in a way that suits our agenda or suits where we're trying to take it? I get quite the same. I get quite concerned about how quickly information comes to us, how much information we can receive. Again, if I go back to my childhood, a weekly newspaper was kind of the catch-up to see what had happened. Currently, we're really looking at being able to see exactly what is happening moment by moment with very little that we're able to do about it. So it causes a real a challenge in how do I live my life? How do I marry someone and plan to have children? How do I manage to hold that enough at bay while also holding it compassionately and doing what I can? When we go down this path, and I see that you're doing the Enlivened Speaking Institute, how is that going to interact with improving the way the world works as far as you've created the vision for that?
Oh, okay. It depends on what level we want to speak on, but I feel the immediate one is what happens as a result of this work is people get more connected to themselves, to their authentic desires, to their message, to what they want to do in the world. And when you connect to that, you can't really talk yourself out of it. When you know your message, when you know what you're here for, it's like, okay, the only next step is to take a step forward. You can't say, I'm confused, I'm in transition. It's like, no, it's clear. So that sense of purpose, which for me is very close to power, like that own personal sense of power of this is what I'm bringing.
Yep.
And the words as well are power. When we can say yes or no, or this is what I want, we're speaking into creation what we want in our life, whether it's pass me a tea or a sales conversation. So I feel my prayer is that as more people connect to who they really are and bring that work into the world, the essence of humanity is good. I don't know that to be true, but that's kind of my prayer. I think we would all ultimately choose to be in, some version of connectedness and thriving as opposed to pushing each other down.
Yeah.
That's one element of it. And then if I go to a whole different frame, for a long time I was asking myself what comes after trauma. So, when I was little, definitely when you were little, trauma wasn't a conversation. And if it was, we thought of trauma as something really, really intense. Over the last decade, like that conversation is really, it's taken mainstream. Like everyone gets that trauma is not just absolutely bad things. Like there's little traumas as well. There's organizational trauma. Like this conversation has been happening for a while. And it's like humanity was ready to start having this conversation. And I was questioning to myself, I'm like, what's the next wave? Because when I look at some of the leading experts talking about trauma, I'm like, they're not thriving. They're not, I don't look at them and think that's what I want to be.
Agreed.
Or that's my inspiration for the world. I'm like, yes, trauma had to happen. They put themselves and they put their passion on the line to bring this to life. And I'm like, what's the next level of integrating these experiences as opposed to just talking about them? And where my own personal research, and this, I mean, the work I'm doing has come to is it's expression. It's expressing the parts of us that have been suppressed and having those parts be received by someone who's willing to listen and fully listen, not just give you their mental attention, but fully be there with you in the process. And when that happens, it's like the change is immediate. It's like I've had the opportunity to say something I've never said or never done or never expressed, and it's been received by a living witness. It's like reality has rewoven the spider web where it was missing.
Yeah.
And that's a big part of what I'm seeing in the work. I had one of my students say to me, she's like, Miroslav, you're not just teaching people to speak, you're teaching people to listen. You're teaching audiences how to listen. And I was like, I've never really considered in those words, but I'm seeing that is a big part of it.
It's actually in my frame a really important part of it is that largely we have been able to find a way to be able to speak. There's literally millions of people now who, in one way or another, have a voice. But the capacity with 2 ears and only 1 mouth to be able to listen well, to be able to really receive what is being delivered, and for that also to be valid material, because there's an awful lot of invalid material. I think you're onto something, I guess, Miroslav. That is what I'm saying. So let's talk about fuck up nights. I have this sense that you didn't come up with the name.
I didn't know, and it's from a business marketing perspective. I do not recommend it either. It's a nightmare. The idea for fuck up nights was started by a group of entrepreneurs in Mexico. I think they got together and they just told their own fuck up stories to each other, and they were like, people need to hear these, and this needs to be a thing where entrepreneurs and business people just share the stories that you don't hear about on social media.
So rather than the success stories, it's the stories of, here's a stupid mistake I made and I've still survived, I've come through, or here's something dreadful that happened to me and I've found a way through it, I've found my way to the other side. Is that essentially how it works?
Exactly. There is stories where there's no happy ending, where you just hear about failures, lots of money lost, lots of emotional bruising. Sometimes people show you the way they've come out on top, but that's an afterthought. It's not the bulk of the interest. And we've had some speakers that have missed the memo, and that's the only time we've had complaints. People will be like, yeah, that was a good talk, but like we want the fuck ups, we want the problems, we want to know the stuff that's not usually there.
It talks to going back to that very humanness that you're speaking about, that very realness, that authenticity, to be able to say, well, it's not all about being Steve Jobs. It's not all about being Elon Musk. It's actually about putting your heart and soul into things, knowing that sometimes it may go really poorly, maybe not according to plan whatsoever, but there is a community in that people can go, well, I've made some mistakes. I'm going to keep going. Is that where you take it?
Yeah, and it's been illuminating, like most of the people I've done business with in my life have been good people. And some of the stories you hear about, it's like contracts that are designed to screw you up if you don't know what to look for.
Yeah.
And it was, for me, some of that was like an awakening. I'm like, oh, there's people here that are just sharks, hoping that people don't read the contract or they don't understand it properly so they can get their way in the business world. They're kind of playing with the only focus is, if I win, I win. And I'll win at all costs. And some of that has been, I think, really like illuminating, both things to be aware of, both like, I think one of my favorite things is just seeing how much people can go through and digest and still keep moving forward.
Yeah.
And sometimes the things that you think would be really horrible for someone, it's that they'd be like, it was intense, like it was a big drama, but they were like, after what I went through with one of those early fuck ups, this was easy. Even though this one looked like, the big problem, the lost millions of dollars, it's like the capacity to deal with it was developed like 6 fuck ups ago.
Right. Well, look, I must come along sometime. I have some great failure stories that I could share.
Perfect. You can come as a guest at this one if you want. I'm happy to send you a gift ticket as well.
That'd be fabulous. I'll see if I can. The other thing I have to do is do that on a motorbike, so it can be quite a chilly ride. So let's see. I'll see whether I can manage it. When is the next one?
It's this coming Tuesday. I think it's the 11th of June.
11th. Okay. Well, this will be happening and on air well before then. So perhaps we'll encourage a few more people to come along and be part of Fuck Up Nights. I want you to just share something with me. When you're talking about having Barack Obama as a client, you're talking about Tony Robbins as a client. You're looking at authentic communication, authentic connection. And so you must have in some way, shape or form, something that sits quietly with you that says, this is the best piece of information or knowledge or something that I've gleaned from all that I've done in my life that you could share to say to people, here's what I recommend that you put in place in order to move forward successfully in life. And I don't mean financially successfully necessarily. I mean to really be able to embrace life, to be really embodied in yourself. What would your best, you've got an entire stadium of 100,000 people and you've got 30 seconds to tell them, and here's your 30-second chance to say, this is the best that I could offer you. Offer that.
Keep the feeling, stay connected to the feeling. Feeling is what makes us human. And the more we can be in that relationship with each other, the more we are all going to thrive together.
Miroslav Bardovic, previously Petrovic.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being a guest on The Village Voice. I look forward, if not to the next, coming to the next Fuck Up Night, then I will definitely come to the one after that. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for being my guest on The Village Voice. I look forward to catching up very soon.
Me too. Thank you for having me, Peter.